Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, The AIOps Advantage, Smarter and Resilient IT Operations in ASEAN. Across ASEAN, organizations are navigating increasingly complex IT environments, including hybrid infrastructures, multi-cloud deployments, distributed teams, and rising performance expectations. At the same time, IT leaders are under pressure to improve resilience, reduce downtime, and achieve more with limited resources. That is where AI Ops comes in. Today's session will explore how AI Ops is helping organizations in ASEAN move from reactive IT management to smarter, predictive, and more resilient operations. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Chris Marshall, VP IDC Asia Pacific, to share key insights on how AI Ops is transforming IT operations across ASEAN. Chris, over to you.
Welcome to the SolarWinds session on building operational resilience in the AI era. My name is Chris Marshall, and I've had a long career in operations and risk management as a practitioner at companies like UBS, but also as a consultant in companies like KPMG and IBM. For the last 8 years or so, I've been leading IDC's research in this area in Asia Pacific. Now, at IDC, we survey companies across the world about their strategic and technical priorities. And what they're telling us here in ASEAN is that their strategic priorities in 2026 are, I quote, innovation, efficiency, and intelligence. And this is felt perhaps most keenly in the IT department itself, which is increasingly charged with managing not just traditional IT operations, but broader operations within the business, and at the same time, forced to really spearhead many AI initiatives across the enterprise. CIOs, accordingly, are faced with specific priorities, such as improved operational efficiency, sustainability, customer experience, and even things like risk management. Now, all these priorities are very much fueled by the current paranoia almost about geopolitics and artificial intelligence. In response, forward-looking CIOs and COOs are looking to use AI to power IT and operations and use AI to automate IT processes and balance their growth, business growth, with resiliency, while agentic AI is being used, or hopefully used, to autonomously detect, predict, and remedy any problems in near real time. While 3/4 of IT spending is still very much associated with keeping the lights on here in ASEAN, there is a shift, I think, towards proactive IT ops with predictive incident prevention and real-time observability. And AI is already seen as delivering value in a number of important operational domains. We predict that this is set to continue apace. And in just 2 years, we expect that nearly half of Asian enterprises will have automated many of their manual workflows with AI agents. And as agents become ubiquitous, as they probably will, hybrid cloud will become a commonplace. And by 2030, just a few years away, a third of all day 2 IT ops tasks in Asia Pacific are likely to be handled by agents with humans in the loop, but not necessarily driving the process. But unlike generative AI, which has been all the rage over the last couple of years, agentic AI will take more time to deploy. There are several reasons for this. Existing operational data silos really make it difficult to integrate across the enterprise. It's difficult to understand what the data you're using, network data, the observability of that data. The skill shortages are especially important in certain areas like security. The complexity that we're only now coming to deal with of hybrid ops, compounded with, in many cases, fragmented governance and legacy infrastructure, that makes the whole thing much more difficult. At the same time, there's also increasing regulatory pressures, forcing companies across every industry to improve the resilience of their operations and IT. This is very much developing across multiple sectors and anchored in, often, national data protection laws, particularly here in ASEAN. It's also driven by cybersecurity or cyber-critical infrastructure regimes and emerging AI guidelines across the world and across the region. Cross-industry rules tend to focus on personal data protection, breach notification, and cross-border data transfers, while sectoral regimes, particularly for government, healthcare, energy, transport, telco, and like, are really adding requirements around incident reporting, reporting on cyber controls, service continuity, and supply chain risk management. Many core data protection and cyber laws have been enforced since the 2010s, but many are starting to be refreshed and, perhaps more importantly, expanded with stricter enforcement and broader operator coverage, and new expectations for what AI governance and third-party supply chain resilience actually means in practice. In financial services in particular, different countries within the ASEAN market have their own approach, but all emphasize operational resilience, cyber risk, third-party vendor risk, and business continuity. Although many countries try very hard to align with international standards, notably the Basel standards on operational resilience, or the European Union's DORA, the Digital Operational Resilience Act, the fact remains that the landscape here in Asia is very much fragmented. And this means even more work particularly for financial service institutions that are operating across the region and need to comply with each of these different areas. And this, no doubt, will necessitate sort of a hub and spoke model in many cases to actually adapting to these various and disparate regulations they have to deal with. Now, traditionally, the top areas of concern in this space have been things like data privacy. But this has all changed since last year when we face something very new with new unilateral actions coming out of the US. The most obvious of which has got to be the US Cloud Act, which has opened the door for US authorities to access, potentially at least, data held overseas. Now, this has obviously driven a lot of companies to worry about what this means from a sovereign data, sovereign cloud, and sovereign AI perspective. They realize that data, cloud, and AI are really quite fundamental to the success of their businesses and even the success of the entire economy. So obviously there's a real pushback here. And I think we've got to be wary of simplistic ideas that it only matters where the data is stored, for example. I mean, in practice, it's a bit more complicated than that. For example, when we do analyses of what people are telling us, we note, for example, that people are concerned about where the controls for the data reside, what the potential use of the data is going to be in particular jurisdictions, and the ability to essentially safeguard the flow of data from one jurisdiction to another. There's also government involvement in this discussion as well, which I think is only going to get more important as people realize that AI is going to be a fundamental driver of economic and national success. So it's no surprise that nearly 68% of Southeast Asian organizations tell us that digital sovereignty is really important due to these economic and geopolitical events. Now, it was only a couple of years ago that in response to this, ASEAN launched the DIFA framework back in 2023. And the idea was to really facilitate regional integration and coordination, particularly in digital data and the digital economy more broadly. The idea was that by integrating and harmonizing digital regulations, governments and companies within the ASEAN region would be able to enhance interoperability and support data movement across the region. Now, this is certainly a good thing to aim for, but I think the reality is still somewhat limited. And most firms, I think, have accepted that complete sovereignty, whether it's of data or processes or controls, is probably unrealistic. Instead, companies, no matter where they are going to have to make trade-offs. But at the same time, they need to stay committed to interoperability standards, because these are what allow you to flexibly respond to any operational issues as they emerge. This inevitably will be done at three distinct levels. At the level of data, first of all, data protection of data at rest, in motion, in use, data security, for example, and perhaps, applying perhaps the most stringent requirements in terms of sovereign controls and compliance for data that's going across the region. So there's sort of a race to the top, if you like, in terms of digital data sovereignty. There's also technical sovereignty level, which I think is underestimated in many organizations. Is really understanding the complete supply chain of the data and where it comes from, and making sure that the processes that support that data movement are actually documented and managed explicitly. Of course, this is where a lot of the automation and resilience capabilities really come to the fore. It's also where network security becomes an important theme. There's also the decisioning part, the operational sovereignty, if you will. Who has control